Topic 11. International cooperation since the 20th century. History GPS. Challenges and cooperation for humanity since the 20th century. International conflicts occurred often in the 20th century. At the same time, science, medicine, and production technology became more advanced. Nevertheless, not all regions had benefited from these progresses, and even the environment had suffered serious damage. The situation had reached a level that mankind could no longer ignore. As a result, the international community sought cooperation. A lot of organizations were set up, with the United Nations as the representative. It aims to promote peace and global cooperation in various aspects, so as to improve the welfare of mankind. Topic Inquiry. How did international cooperation in the 20th century work for peace and development? 1. Common challenges faced by mankind. In the 20th century, mankind experienced 2 world wars. Regional conflicts also broke out. Economic inequality, environmental destruction, and diseases appeared successively. Faced with the common threats to peace and development, the international community sought to cooperate in tackling common problems. 2. Birth of the United Nations. After the 2 world wars, people realized that they had to set up a more capable international peacekeeping organization. This gave birth to the United Nations in 1945. The United Nations aims to settle disputes by peaceful means. It also promotes international cooperation through setting up special agencies, calling international conferences, and making international treaties. 3. Achievements and limitations of the United Nations. After its establishment, the UN had remarkable achievements in maintaining peace. No global war ever broke out after 1945. It also promoted international cooperation in different areas. This helped to promote global sustainable development. Nevertheless, the UN still had a lot of limitations because of conflicting interests and lack of funds. Look at the timeline of events. Signing of the United Nations Charter, 1945. 51 countries signed the United Nations Charter. Calling of the first meeting of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, 1972. Participating countries agreed to strengthen their cooperation in environmental protection. The World Health Organization successfully eliminated smallpox, 1980. Smallpox was eliminated following a global campaign led by the WHO. Announcement of the Rio Declaration and signing of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, 1992. More developed countries agreed to provide technical assistance to less developed countries for developing renewable energies. Announcement of the International Conference on Population and Development Programme of Action, 1994. It laid down the common goals of global sustainable development. History Starter. 1. Globalization occurred rapidly in the 20th century. The increasing interactions across regions and countries fostered developments in different areas, but it also resulted in many global challenges. 2. From 1914 to 1945, mankind experienced 2 unprecedented world wars. With the use of more advanced military technology, they caused serious casualties and destruction. 3. On the other hand, the fruits of global economic development did not benefit the less developed countries. Distribution of world health was uneven. Some countries faced severe economic problems. 4. During urbanization and industrialization, the lack of environmental planning destroyed the Earth's ecosystems. For example, emissions of harmful pollutants led to global warming. 5. New viruses and infectious diseases endangered human health. Advancements in transportation meant that diseases spread and developed into pandemics more easily. 6. These challenges involved the interests of all mankind. Thus, international cooperation began. The United Nations, founded in 1945, was an important attempt towards such goal. 7. The United Nations tried to settle disputes through condemnation, sanction, diplomatic mediation, and even sending peacekeeping forces. It helped prevent the spread of conflicts. 8. The United Nations also promoted exchanges and cooperation among countries in various fields. It set up special organs, held international conferences, and signed treaties. It was an important platform for addressing common challenges. A. Background of international cooperation. General challenges for humanity since the 20th century. Guiding question. What were the common challenges faced by mankind since the 20th century? 1. Continuous large-scale conflicts. A. Increasing number and scale of destruction of conflicts. Nationalism, ideological differences, territorial disputes, and ethnic and religious conflicts had caused over 50 large-scale violent conflicts in the 20th century. Owing to the more advanced military technology, wars of the 20th century caused heavier casualties. Over 80 million people died in the two world wars. Wars also caused heavy economic losses. Many affected countries faced serious economic and social problems and even humanitarian crises in the post-war period. Look at the source 11.1. Regional military conflicts between 1946 and 1999. From the source. Study source 11.1. According to the source, what was the trend of the number of regional military conflicts in the second half of the 20th century? In which two continents did these military conflicts mainly occur? B. Attempts at promoting peace. In the early 20th century, the situation in Europe was getting tense. Some countries called for disarmament and peace conferences. Non-governmental societies also took actions such as holding the Universal Peace Congress to promote peace. However, they failed to stop the outbreak of the First World War. After the war, the United States suggested establishing the League of Nations in 1920. The League aimed to settle disputes through international cooperation and stop aggression by collective security. It successfully mediated several disputes in the 1920s, but failed to stop the aggression of totalitarian states in the 1930s. A world war broke out again. Look at the source 11.2. Symbol of the League of Nations, left, and American President Wilson, right, who suggested setting up the League of Nations. History Extra. Peace symbols. There have been a lot of peace symbols in history. For example, the olive branch was the symbol of peace and victory in ancient Greece. Early Christian art used olive branches as well as doves as peace symbols. Both of them became Western peace symbols later on. In 1958, British artist Holtom designed the sign as the logo for the British campaign for nuclear disarmament. The circle represents the Earth, while the interior represents the flag signals for the letter N and D, standing for nuclear disarmament. The V-shape hand gesture is also a common peace symbol today. 2. Extreme global economic inequality. A. Unequal distribution of wealth. Since the late 19th century, the United States and European countries had a large proportion of the world's wealth through colonial expansion. Their domination over the global economy continued after the Second World War. In the late 20th century, the less developed countries were mainly located in Africa, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and South America. The more developed countries were mainly located in Europe, North America, and Oceania. The latter only accounted for about 30% of the world population, but held nearly 80% of the world wealth and consumed about 70% of the world resources. The less developed countries had a huge population but lacked resources. This worsened their economic and social problems. Look at the source 11.3. A cartoon about the unequal distribution of wealth in the 20th century above, and the world distribution of wealth per adult in the late 20th century below. History decoded. More developed and less developed countries. The terms developed and undeveloped countries were adopted to categorize countries at different levels of development. Later, the idea of sustainable development became popular. The terms more developed and less developed countries are used instead to demonstrate the idea that there can also be further developments among developed countries. International organizations used many indicators to distinguish between more and less developed countries. The major differences between them are shown below. Cambodia is an example of a less developed country. In 2020, agriculture accounted for nearly 23% of its GDP. In most of the Southeast Asian countries, the agricultural sector no longer contributed to more than 1/5 of their GDP. B. Vicious cycle of poverty. The less developed countries mainly relied on exporting agricultural products and natural resources to earn foreign exchange. As the prices were affected by global market demand, their earnings were unstable. They continued to borrow from the more developed countries for national development. A portion of foreign loans was even used to pay for the debt interest. It led to a vicious cycle of poverty and debts. Look at the source 11.4. African countries had low medical and hygiene standards. A large part of national expenditure was spent on imported patent medicine developed by the more developed countries. 3. Exploitation and destruction of the environment. A. Population growth and environmental exploitation. In the 20th century, the rise in food supply and level of medical technology increased humans' lifespan. World's population increased from 1.6 billion in the early 20th century to 6 billion in the late 20th century. Population growth and economic development caused people to further exploit the environment for different resources. B. Environmental destruction. Many countries experienced urbanization and industrialization in the 20th century. However, they neglected environmental protection, including formulating plans and regulations for sustainable development. It brought about problems of overexploitation and pollution. For example, deforestation, overfishing, and overcultivation destroyed the ecosystems. Improper waste disposal and emissions caused pollutions. These destructions caused more frequent natural disasters and threatened human life. Factories and cars emitted a large amount of harmful gases, causing air pollution. Untreated domestic and industrial sewage flowed into rivers, polluting drinking water. Drilling for oil and natural gas on the seas, together with the busy sea transport and oil spills from ships, caused marine pollution. Deforestation led to serious soil erosion. It also threatened the existence of wildlife. History in depth. Developing the Amazon rainforest. The Amazon rainforest in South America is the largest tropical rainforest in the world. It constitutes half of the world's rainforests. It not only has great ecological value because of its biodiversity, but also releases 1/3 of the world's oxygen as lungs of the planet. Since the 1970s, Brazil actively developed the Amazon rainforest. It encouraged people to open up land and grow commercial crops. People were also allowed to cut down trees, exploit minerals and oil, and carry out construction works there. Later, Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia started similar development plans in order to promote economic development. However, the development plans caused huge damage to the ecosystem of the Amazon rainforest and the lives of people living there. By 1999, the rainforest had reduced in size rapidly. About 14% of the whole rainforest had disappeared. Look at the source 11.5. Satellite map of South America in 2017. The deep green part in the Amazon rainforest. Look at the source 11.6. The development of the Amazon rainforest caused a reduction of species. Besides, many tribes living in the rainforest have been forced to leave their homeland. The tribal culture is disappearing. C. Global environmental crisis. 1. Greenhouse effect and ozone depletion. As a result of urbanization and industrialization, greenhouse gases were emitted into the atmosphere. They blocked solar radiation from leaving the Earth, causing a rise in world temperature. Global warming accelerated the melting of polar ice sheets. Sea levels rose. Low-lying coastal areas faced the danger of being submerged. Some harmful gases even led to ozone depletion above Antarctica. This increased the risks of getting skin cancer. 2. Harmful waste pollution across the world. Some more developed countries exported industrial, medical, and even nuclear wastes to less developed countries for waste treatment. However, most of the less developed countries did not have proper waste treatment facilities. When the harmful waste flowed into rivers and oceans, the polluted areas were enlarged. Consuming contaminated water and seafood threatened the health of the people. Look at the source 11.7. Satellite map of Antarctica in 2013. The blue part is the depletion of the ozone layer caused by harmful gases. Look at the source 11.8. Major transfer routes of electronic wastes. From the source. Study source 11.8. How did the transfer of electronic wastes operate? 4. Spread of diseases and problems of medical care. A. Infectious diseases and new diseases. The improvement of transportation in the 20th century increased the accessibility of people, but also made the spread of diseases easier. Globalization enabled local infectious diseases to turn into pandemics. For example, in 1957, the Asian flu spread to Europe and North America and caused about 2 million deaths. New viruses and infectious diseases posed greater threats to mankind. For example, the death rate of the Ebola virus, which first appeared in 1976, was over 50%. It is still unpreventable and incurable. The first case of acquired immunodeficiency syndrome was reported in 1981. By 1999, over 30 million people were diagnosed with AIDS. There is still no cure for the disease. History Extra. The untraceable flu. Between 1918 and 1919, the Spanish flu spread around the world. The flu epidemic broke out during the First World War. Both the Allied powers and Central powers suppressed the news about the flu to avoid public fear. Therefore, the masses of these countries did not know much about the disease and its origins. In contrast, Spain was a neutral state during the war, and its king also contracted the flu. There was widespread publicity on the epidemic in Spain. Thus, the term Spanish flu emerged. Interestingly, the Spanish flu disappeared as suddenly as it appeared. The cause still remains unknown. B. Poor quality medical care in less developed countries. Hygiene was poor in less developed countries, and people there lacked basic medical knowledge. Food shortage, environmental pollution, and wars made it more difficult for them to prevent and control epidemics. Therefore, the death rate from diseases in less developed countries was relatively high. In the late 20th century, diseases which had been eliminated in more developed countries were still raging in less developed countries. Moreover, newly diagnosed AIDS patients were mostly found in Africa. As less developed countries lacked medical professionals and medicine, they heavily relied on the aid of more developed countries and international medical organizations. Look at the source 11.9. By the late 20th century, many people in less developed countries still had no access to clean drinking water. Unclean water was a major reason for the spread of epidemics in these countries and their high death rates. Look at the source 11.10. Medical staff per 100,000 people in Europe and Africa in 1999. Data-based question 1. Aim to understand the AIDS problem in the 20th century. Level 3. Interpreting sources and using own knowledge and understanding. Study the source below and answer the questions that follow. Source: data about global AIDS patients from 1990 to 1999. B. The establishment and work of the United Nations. Guiding question: how did the United Nations promote peace through international cooperation in the 20th century? How effective was it? 1. Background to establishment. The lesson of the First World War led to the establishment of the League of Nations. However, the League lacked experience in general support. Its peacekeeping aim was also hindered by its institutional weaknesses. The outbreak of the Second World War urged the Allied powers to set up a more capable international peacekeeping organization to replace the failed League. 2. Establishment procedure. A. Atlantic Charter. In August 1941, the United States and Britain issued the Atlantic Charter. They proposed using peaceful methods to settle disputes and promote international cooperation after the war. The Atlantic Charter was the basis for the United Nations. B. Declaration of the United Nations. In January 1942, 26 countries signed the Declaration of the United Nations, promising not to negotiate with the Axis powers for peace alone. The term United Nations first appeared in the Declaration. Look at the source 11.11. The United Nations headquarters in New York City, the United States. C. Establishment of the United Nations. From April to June 1945, 50 countries drafted and signed the United Nations Charter at the San Francisco Conference. Later, Poland also signed the Charter and became the 51st founding member. On October 24, the Charter entered into force, making the establishment of the United Nations. 3. Aims. According to the United Nations Charter, the major aims of the UN include maintaining international peace and security through international cooperation, eliminating the threats to peace and stopping aggression, settling disputes between countries by peaceful means, promoting friendly relations among nations, promoting international cooperation in economic, social, and cultural areas, promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all. United Nations Charter. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. And for these ends, to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, to ensure, by the acceptance of principles and the institution of methods, that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest, to employ international machinery for the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all peoples. This is an excerpt from the United Nations Charter left and the sculpture in front of the UN headquarters right. The sculpture was donated by the Soviet Union in 1959. It symbolizes converting the means of war and destruction, the sword, into creative tools, plowshare, for the benefit of mankind. 4. Structure. The UN has 6 organs to carry out its work. They are responsible for different areas of work. A. General Assembly. It is the major policy-making organ. It is made up of the representatives of all member states. It holds its annual meeting in September. Each member state has 1 vote. Its main functions include electing the non-permanent members of the Security Council, members of other UN bodies, and judges of the International Court of Justice, approving the UN budget, deciding on the spending of the UN funds and the admission of new members, appointing the Secretary General, making suggestions on matters related to peacekeeping. Look at the source 11.13. Guterres, who took office as the UN Secretary General in 2017, above, and the conference room of the United Nations General Assembly, below. B. Security Council. It is made up of 11 in 1945 members. The United States, Russia, the Soviet Union from 1945 to 1991, Britain, France, and China are permanent members. The other non-permanent members are elected every 2 years. Each member state has 1 vote. Passing decisions on important matters requires 9 affirmative votes, 7 in 1945, including those of all 5 permanent members. Its major responsibility is to maintain world peace and security. It may impose economic sanctions or take military action against offending states. C. Secretariat. It is the administrative organ of the UN. It is headed by the Secretary General, who is appointed for a 5-year term. Its main duties include supervising and implementing the decisions of all UN organs, mediating and settling international disputes, organizing international conferences on issues of worldwide concern, administering peacekeeping operations. Look at the source 11.14. Structure of the UN Security Council. According to the United Nations Charter, it is the only UN organ which decisions are binding on member states. D. Trusteeship Council. It was responsible for administering trust territories after the Second World War and helping them gain independence. It stopped operation in 1994 after the last trust territory, Palau, gained independence. E. Economic and Social Council. It is made up of 54, originally 18 member states. It consists of a number of specialized agencies and commissions, including the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, World Health Organization, WHO, and United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, etc. It is responsible for promoting sustainable development in economic, social, and environmental areas. F. International Court of Justice. Located in Hague, it is the UN judicial organ. It is formed by 15 judges of different nationalities elected by the General Assembly and Security Council. Its main duties are to settle international disputes, interpret international laws, and give legal advice to the United Nations and its specialized agencies. Look at the source 11.15. The International Court of Justice settling the disputes between Greece and Macedonia in 1995. 5. Work and Achievements. A. Peacekeeping. Work. The main functions of the UN are to settle disputes and maintain peace. The International Court of Justice arbitrates disputes between member states according to international laws. All member states have to comply with decisions of the court involving them. In case of military conflicts or wars, the Security Council usually starts with diplomatic mediation first, such as arranging negotiations and making settlement plans. If peaceful intervention fails, it can impose economic or military sanctions and even send peacekeeping forces to stop conflicts. The UN also monitors ceasefires, provides humanitarian aid to the people in conflict-ridden regions, and helps reconstruct these regions. History in depth. United Nations Peacekeeping Forces. United Nations peacekeeping forces are formed by volunteers of member states. The UN must have the consent of the parties in conflict before sending the forces. Also, the forces must remain neutral when taking action. Its main work includes monitoring ceasefires, disarming the parties in conflict, supporting free elections, maintaining law and order, and protecting civilians and human rights. UN peacekeeping forces are also called the Blue Helmets because they wear blue helmets and berets or turbans. A peacekeeping operation also involves medical staff, engineers, and other professionals and workers. 2. Achievements. In the 20th century, the UN became an important bridge of negotiation for the international society. For example, in 1953, it successfully settled the dispute between Britain and France over the sovereignty of some islands in the English Channel. From 1948 to 2000, the UN had completed 48 peacekeeping operations. The work of the UN also contributed to long-lasting peace. For example, after the end of the Yugoslav Civil War from 1991 to 1999, it helped refugees return home and provided humanitarian aid. It also helped local governments re-establish administrative organs. UN peacekeeping forces winning the Nobel Peace Prize showed that the work of the UN had won international recognition. Look at the source 11.16. Commemorative stamps making UN peacekeeping forces winning the 1988 Nobel Peace Prize. 3. Limitations. The UN failed to solve many disputes. For example, the white government of South Africa had ignored UN's condemnation and upheld the policy of apartheid from the 1950s to the 1990s. Some permanent members of the UN Security Council had also vetoed the decision to impose sanctions on South Africa. In the case of large-scale military conflicts, the warring parties would only accept UN ceasefire order under public pressure or when the war had reached a stalemate. They might even break ceasefire. The UN lacked strong armed forces. There were incidents where its peacekeeping forces were driven away or held hostage. All these undermine the prestige of the UN. Look at the source 11.17. During the Yugoslav Civil War, Serbian soldiers forced UN peacekeeping forces in Srebrenica to withdraw. Afterwards, over 8,000 Bosnian men were massacred there. It was an example of the UN's complete failure to maintain peace. Historical skills. Achievement and limitation. The terms achievement and limitation are frequently mentioned in this topic. We can take the work of the UN as an example to understand the meaning of these two words. The aims of the UN: maintain peace and promote international economic cooperation, etc. The areas of work in which the UN has succeeded in achieving its aims are its achievements. The areas of work in which the UN has failed to meet its aims or caused negative impacts are its limitations. To conclude, the UN sought to resolve disputes peacefully, aims. In 1953, the International Court of Justice arbitrated the sovereignty dispute between Britain and France, work. It succeeded in ending the dispute, achievement. Students often mix up the concepts of limitation and the factors of limitation, obstacles to achievement. The following examples show the differences. The UN sent peacekeeping troops to monitor ceasefire work, but the troops were driven away and even held hostage. Limitation. The UN lacked strong armed forces. Factor of limitation, making it unable to monitor ceasefire effectively. B. Poverty reduction. 1. Work. In the 20th century, the UN worked to reduce poverty through the following agencies. International Monetary Fund, IMF. Established in 1944, it worked to oversee the global monetary system and provide loans to low-income countries. World Bank. Established in 1944, it provided interest-free loans to poor countries and advice on economic development. Food and Agriculture Organization. Established in 1945, it worked to promote the sustainable development of agriculture, improve the living standards of farmers, and eradicate poverty. 2. Achievements. The UN assisted less developed countries in improving the quantity and quality of their agricultural products and their entry into the world market. The increase in national income helped these countries break the vicious cycle of poverty. The UN also held regular international conferences and promoted the signing of treaties. Global cooperation became increasingly common. For example, in 1994, the International Conference on Population and Development Program of Action was adopted by 179 countries. It laid down the common goals of global sustainable development. Look at the source 11.18. The UN assisted African children with vaccination shots, left, and provided agricultural technical assistance to African farmers, right. 3. Limitations. The UN still had limited achievements in the area of poverty reduction. For example, the economy of the African country Ethiopia grew between 8% to 10% annually in the 1990s, but the rate of extreme poverty decreased by less than 2%. It showed that the rate of poverty reduction was still slow. According to the suggestion of the UN in 1970, official development assistance from more developed countries should amount to 1.7% of their national income. However, most donor countries did not meet the target. It reflected the limitations of the UN on raising international aid. C. Environmental protection. 1. Work. In the 20th century, the UN held a series of international conferences to promote environmental protection. United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. 113 countries attended the first meeting in 1972. They agreed to strengthen their cooperation in environmental protection. United Nations Environment Programme. Established in 1972, it formulated guidelines to promote environmental protection and sustainable development. Kyoto Conference. The major industrial countries signed the Kyoto Protocol at the conference in 1997. It required the more developed countries to cut down emissions on carbon dioxide. 2. Achievements. The United Nations Conference on the Human Environment was the first large-scale international conference on environmental cooperation. It also decided to hold the conference every 10 years to achieve long-term cooperation. Through the work of the UN, many environmental protection declarations and treaties were signed. Its work also enhanced global awareness of environmental protection. Many governments had set up departments to deal with environmental issues and promote sustainable development. 3. Limitations. Many countries questioned the environmental treaties brought about the UN. For example, some countries criticized that the carbon dioxide emission reduction targets in the Kyoto Protocol were not based on emissions per capita. Some more developed countries were also displeased with its failure to limit the emissions of less developed countries. Besides, these international treaties were non-binding. There was no mechanism to punish signatories which violated the treaties. Also, the UN lacked the authority to enforce the treaties. For example, it failed to force the United States to ratify the Kyoto Protocol. Look at the source 11.20. A chemical plant in India. India was not subject to the emission reduction targets outlined in the Kyoto Protocol because it was a less developed country. Some more developed signatory countries criticized this. Data-based question 2. Aim: to understand the limitations of the UN's work in environmental protection. Level 3. Interpreting sources and using own knowledge and understanding. Study the source below and answer the questions that follow. Source: a cartoon about the Kyoto Protocol. D. Improvement in medicine and hygiene. 1. Work. In the 20th century, the UN mainly worked through the following organs to improve global medicine and hygiene. World Health Organization. Established in 1948, its work included overseeing global hygiene and eradicating diseases. Joint United Nations Programme on HIV/AIDS. As a specialized agency since 1996, its work included releasing data about AIDS and monitoring the trend. It also held activities to raise public concern for AIDS and preventive awareness. 2. Achievements. The establishment of the WHO was a milestone in international healthcare cooperation. It enacted regulations to protect public health and promote cooperation between different parties. For example, it signed a cooperation agreement with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It greatly improved medical services in Southeast Asia. The WHO also helped control the spread of epidemics. For example, following a global campaign led by the WHO, smallpox was eliminated in 1980. Look at the source 11.21. Logo of the WHO above, and the inoculating smallpox vaccine statue in the WHO headquarters. From 1966 to 1980, the WHO carried out the smallpox eradication program and achieved significant results. 3. Limitations. By the end of the 20th century, less developed countries still lacked basic medical services. Some diseases that were nearly eliminated in other areas still existed there. Most of their assistance from the UN was spent on economic development rather than on improving medicine and hygiene. Besides, international cooperation focused on prevention and treatment of specific diseases. Epidemics in some regions may be neglected. The patent system and market demand also caused some medicines and treatments to be too expensive or in short supply. E. Technological development. 1. Work. In the 20th century, the UN promoted international cooperation in technology mainly through the following organs. International Telecommunication Union, ITU. As a specialized agency since 1947, its main work included standardizing telecommunication and strengthening the cooperation in telecommunication. International Atomic Energy Agency. Established in 1957, its main work included formulating nuclear safety standards and helping member states develop nuclear energy. Commission on Science and Technology for Development. Established in 1992, it carried out scientific research and especially gave advice on the use of technology to less developed countries. Look at the source 11.22. Establishment of the IAEA in 1957. The IAEA reported to the UN General Assembly and Security Council regularly. 2. Achievements. The UN improved global technological levels and quality of life. For example, the conferences held by the ITU provided a platform for exchanging telecommunications technology. The UN also brought about international agreements. According to the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992, more developed countries agreed to provide technical assistance to less developed countries for developing renewable energies. 3. Limitations. In the 20th century, more developed countries refused to transfer their advanced technology to safeguard their interests. On the other hand, technological development of less developed countries remained stagnant. They had to rely on imported foreign technology. This imbalance was not changed by the efforts of the UN. Though the UN encouraged peaceful use of technology, some countries used nuclear technologies to produce nuclear weapons. The IAEA lacked the authority to stop them. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, signed in 1968, also depended on voluntary compliance by the signatories. Look at the source 11.23. Since the late 20th century, the UN has gradually assisted less developed countries in developing renewable energies. The map shows the use of renewable energy in Ghana in 2016. Over 50% of the country's electricity is generated by it. History extended. Work of regional governmental organizations. Formation of regional governmental organizations. In addition to the UN, other intergovernmental organizations were also formed in the 20th century. For example, the European Union (EU) and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations are both regional governmental organizations formed by countries of the regions. They also work to promote global collaborations and world peace. Evolution of European regional cooperation. In 1952, the Western European countries began regional economic cooperation and formed the European Coal and Steel Community. Afterwards, more European countries became member states and increased their cooperative efforts. Finally, the European Union was formed in 1993. There were 12 founding members including Britain, France, and Germany. EU promoting regional cooperation and integration. The EU aims to promote European cooperation and integration in economic, political, and social areas. Promoting population movement. Citizens of EU member states have the same rights to live and move freely within the EU. Promoting economic and trade cooperation. The EU extended its single market to non-EU members parties in 1994. Later, the European Central Bank was set up and the euro was introduced. Promoting social and cultural cooperation. The EU has common policies covering issues such as agricultural policy, food safety, environmental standards, employment, justice, and home affairs. EU promoting international cooperation. The EU also works to promote international cooperation. It provided funding to support development programs of the UN. It carried out operations to support the UN peacekeeping forces. It also promoted the signing of the Kyoto Protocol. The EU has consistently devoted a lot of resources to aid less developed countries. The European Commission Humanitarian Aid Office, set up in 1992, is responsible for coordinating its humanitarian aid work in different countries. Formation of ASEAN. In 1967, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand formed the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. ASEAN promoting regional cooperation. The ASEAN works to maintain regional peace and strengthen cooperation and development of Southeast Asian countries in various areas. Promoting economic and trade cooperation. In 1992, trade among ASEAN economies was granted tariff preference. In 2002, the ASEAN Free Trade Area (AFTA) was established. Other different schemes have also been implemented, strengthening the cooperation. Promoting social and cultural cooperation. Member states provide facilities to each other to support training and research and hold cultural exchanges. They promote understanding and friendship between peoples. ASEAN promoting international cooperation. The ASEAN works to negotiate and cooperate with the international society. For example, in 1974, the ASEAN held meetings with the UN to promote different developments in the region. In 1994, the ASEAN Regional Forum was established. Later, it became a key platform for dialogues and cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region. The ASEAN also establishes relations with other regional governmental organizations, such as the EU. They exchange opinions on international issues and cooperate together. Look at the source 11.24. The ASEAN Plus 3 Summit, established in 1997, is a mechanism for cooperation formed by the ASEAN, China, Japan, and Korea. It works to promote the regional cooperation of Asian countries. Rise of INGOs. INGOs are non-profit-making private organizations. They aim to raise public awareness of different issues through international cooperation. They also provide direct aid to people in need. International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC. Year of establishment, 1863. Main work, providing emergency medical and humanitarian aid, promoting international cooperation in medicine, and taking part in controlling AIDS, smallpox, and malaria. Oxfam. Year of establishment, 1942. Main work, providing training on agricultural technology and fighting for equal and fair international trade. World Vision. Year of establishment, 1950. Main work, promoting child sponsorship globally, providing medical technical support to countries in need, and taking part in reconstructing disaster areas. Greenpeace. Year of establishment, 1971. Main work, promoting environmental education and energy conservation, conducting research on the environment, urging governments to introduce environmental laws and regulations. Medicines Sans Frontiers. Year of establishment, 1971. Main work, providing emergency medical and humanitarian aid, training medical staff from less developed countries, taking part in constructing hospitals and providing vaccination services. Cooperation between international organizations. Cooperation between INGOs, Steering Committee for Humanitarian Response. In 1972, Oxfam, the League of Red Cross, and the Lutheran World Federation established the committee. To respond to humanitarian emergencies effectively, it coordinates the work of different organizations and shares information about disasters. Today, 9 of the world's leading humanitarian INGOs are its members. The committee holds regular meetings annually. In times of natural disasters or wars, it represents its members and works with the United Nations Office for the Coordination and Humanitarian Affairs. Cooperation between international governmental organizations and INGOs. The Interagency Standing Committee. In 1992, the UN established the committee to coordinate the cooperation between its aid organizations and INGOs. It works to establish partnerships between them and improve the efficiency of aid work. Members of the committee hold regular meetings to formulate humanitarian regulations and programs, facilitate the work of different organizations, and settle humanitarian disputes between members. Look at the source 11.25. Logo of the ISES. In order to provide humanitarian aid efficiently, the committee has different groups responsible for different areas, for example, food and hygiene.